Welcome to Along the Danube webinar, Treasures of Central Europe's Signature Cities, a webinar brought to you by Architectural Adventures. This webinar is a conversation with David Rifkind, the subject matter expert that will be leading this Architectural Adventures trip slated for June 22nd through July 1st, 2017. Before we get started, a little bit about Architectural Adventures tours. We specialize in small group travel and work with the best in-class business-to-business educational travel companies and tour operators to build or select prepackaged tours that fulfill our vision. Our vision is the exploration and appreciation of the world's architecture and bringing together small group tours. They'll go well beyond simple sightseeing, giving travelers that exclusive opportunity to engage with the architecture and the sights of the cities. Our travelers participate in special excursions. They gain exclusive behind-the-scenes access and gain insider knowledge to popular sites, as well as lesser-known sites. It gives our travelers a unique opportunity to experience each destination with like-minded travelers, and also enjoy educational guidance and commentary from pre-selected subject matter experts who will offer unique insight through both the formal and informal discussions. We'll take care of every detail of your trip, allowing you to focus on the culture and the architecture, not on the logistics. The subject matter expert for Along the Danube is David Rifkind. David is a professor of architectural history, theory, and design at Florida International University. David, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I'm trained as an architect and as an architectural historian, and I continue to practice as a designer. I also serve as the Associate Dean of Students in the College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts at FIU. And I've been on several of these trips on cruises in Europe, including a cruise that went down the Danube with an itinerary very similar to the one that we'll be following. And I'm very excited to return to these cities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being with us today and also for leading this trip. So we'll get started right into the trip itinerary. So day one, of course, we depart our gateway cities, and we're going to meet in Prague. Day two will be Prague at your leisure for all of our travelers. So David, what can you tell us a little bit about the Czech capital, and what are some must-sees that you recommend for our travelers on this day?
Well, Prague is a wonderful city to wander around by foot. The Malá Strana, the original old quarter along the banks of the Vltava River, is a really lovely area to wander around. There are some extraordinary sights there, including in the main town square there is an astronomical clock that they call the Orloj, which is the oldest continuously operating, or the oldest operating astronomical clock in the world. It's really wonderful to go there and see it several times a day. You'll see a really large crowd around it. The town square is really spectacular. It's the Old Town Square, which has the Old Town Hall. And the medieval structure of the city is really lovely. And then as you move around the outside of that area, you'll get into some of the newer quarters, which have some really beautiful examples of architecture from the 1920s and 1930s, including the old Bata store. So for both people who are interested in medieval architecture and people interested in modern architecture, you'll find some really wonderful things in Prague.
Wonderful. It looks like a wonderful city just to walk around and explore and get lost in. So day three of our itinerary is going to be picturesque Old Town Prague. And this features Gothic, high Baroque, and modern architecture. What can you tell us about the Old Town?
Well, the Old Town, in the center of the image is the tower with the astronomical clock down at the bottom, and you can see the crowd gathering around it. So the Old Town Square is at the center of the Old Town. It's just off of the river. And when you wander down to the river, you cross over the Charles Bridge, which is the spectacular old bridge dating from the 14th century that is lined with statues on either side. And in a minute, I think we'll talk about Prague Castle. But this is the Old Town Square is in the lower town, and Prague Castle is up in the high town above the city.
Great, and that brings us to the next day of our itinerary, day 4, which, as you mentioned, will be touring the castles of Prague. So what can you tell us about the castle's history? What can we expect to see on this day?
Yeah, the old, the castle, the Prague Castle, crowns the hill above the city, and that is some of the oldest settlement in the area. It goes back over 12 centuries. The construction of the castle, and it's a very large complex. It's one of the largest castle complexes, or old castle complexes, in the world. It right now serves as, among other things, the residence of the president of the Czech Republic, and it has always served as a seat of royal power and also of religious power. It's the site of St. Vitus Cathedral, which is the largest church in the country, and it too is a medieval cathedral. It's the third church that stood on its site, and it dates from that period, this great 14th century sort of growth of the city of Prague. It's a really spectacular cathedral, by the way. So St. Vitus is a really gorgeous Gothic cathedral, originally laid out by a French master mason who was brought to Prague for the purpose, and then, of course, built over quite a long period of time, like most Gothic cathedrals. But St. Vitus is quite spectacular, and it's just one part of this very large castle complex. And you can easily spend the day wandering through Prague Castle. However, I should also mention that if you're up on that side of the city, you're also very close to one of Adolf Loos's villas. So for people who are real devotees of modern architecture, particularly from the 1920s, it's worth the side trip to go visit during one of the tours of the Villa Mueller, which is not too far from Prague Castle.
Wonderful. The next day we actually will say goodbye to Prague, and we're going to transfer to Passau, Germany, and we'll then be boarding to the MS Amadeus Brilliant, which is an exclusively chartered deluxe small river ship. So what can we expect on this day as we're cruising along?
Well, it'll be lovely to pass through Passau. Passau is in a really interesting location geographically. It sits right at the border of Germany and, well, it's right along the Danube at the German border. And so we'll go down through Bohemia from Prague, and when we get to Passau, we'll be at the, basically at the German, the border of Lower Bavaria and Bohemia. And Passau is interesting because it's also at the crossroads of 3 rivers, which is relatively unusual. It sits on the Danube, but it's also where the Danube is joined by the Inn and the Ilz. And what's fascinating about that, it's kind of a nerdy thing, but you see 3 different colors of water coming together because you've got the Ilz, which comes down with really bright, the Ilz is the one that comes in with really dark-colored water filled with a lot of sediment, and the Inn comes down with very brightly colored water coming from the Alps. And so you'll see these 3 different rivers mixing together in Passau, and then we'll leave Passau and travel down the river, I believe, toward Dürnstein.
And we'll continue with day 6 along the Danube. And Dürnstein is there. What can you tell us about Dürnstein?
Dürnstein is a really lovely town, again, sitting at a really strategic location along the Danube. What we'll be doing, too, is passing a lot of places like Dürnstein that are at these strategic locations where a castle will guard one side or one bank of the river. Dürnstein is interesting because it's also historically the place where Richard the Lionheart, or King Richard I of England, was held captive on his return from the Crusades. He was captured by the Duke of Austria. It's a kind of interesting moment in European history. But the city is mostly famous for that because it was in the castle that Richard the Lionheart was held hostage and before he was ransomed. But it's a really lovely city. Again, it's another one of these medieval cities where there's a really spectacular location where the church, the remains of the castle, and other buildings are all formed out of the local stone. So it's a really beautiful sort of mixture of geology and architecture.
It looks amazing. And we'll move on to day 7, which is Mozart's Vienna. So on this day, we're going to be exploring the Austrian capital and then taking part in an expert-led tour of the Austrian architect Otto Wagner's iconic buildings. So what can you tell us about Wagner's designs?
Oh, well, Vienna is spectacular, and before I talk about Wagner, I do want to mention that the Staatsoper, the state opera house that's in this slide, is one of a number of buildings built along the Ringstrasse, which is the ring road around Vienna. So what happens is that Vienna, right in the middle of the 19th century, sees an explosion in its population and its growth, and the city decides to tear down the old ramparts, which had constrained the growth of the medieval city, and replace it with a grand boulevard. And that boulevard ends up being the site of a number of important buildings: the Academy of Fine Arts, the Palace of Justice, the Parliament, and the Town Hall, but also all these major cultural institutions like the Academy of Fine Arts, the State Opera, the theater, the university, and a number of other buildings. So it's all the civic structures that represent culture and government and so on. It's a really spectacular moment in the growth of Vienna, but it also then provides an opportunity for, in the late 19th century, for the emergence of Otto Wagner, this great architect right at the emergence of modern architecture. He's somebody who's concerned with trying to find an appropriate way of representing the modern era. He's not happy with the existing neoclassical way of building in Vienna, and so he's part of the Secession, the group of artists and architects. We're trying to find an alternative to neoclassicism, something that was appropriate to the modern era. And so Wagner goes ahead and builds a number of really remarkable buildings. We'll have a chance to see the Post Office Savings Bank, which is one of the first buildings to elegantly integrate steel and glass construction into a monumental inner city building. So this is a building that on the outside has this facade cladding of beautiful white marble held in place by aluminum bolts and these little sort of details. But then on the inside, there's this great hall, which is just glass and steel. It's quite spectacular. And there are other buildings like that that we'll have a chance to visit as well. But the thing that I love most about Wagner's intervention in the city of Vienna is his design of the train stations for the Metropolitan Railway. So it's basically a railway system, a subway and elevated railway system, where the stations are designed by Wagner, and they each become a sort of a spectacular moment to integrate this new transportation infrastructure into the growing city. And then Wagner is also responsible for some of the embankments along the river and the canal. So this is going to be a fantastic opportunity to see Wagner's work around the capital.
What a great preview of that day. Thank you. So on day 8 of the itinerary, we're going to visit the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna. What can you tell us, David, about the palace and its history?
The Schönbrunn Palace is one of those places where you see a lot of modern European history crystallizing in a single location. And its origins go back to when the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian II, first established a royal seat there in Vienna. That was back in the 16th century, but by the 17th century, it had come to be sort of a beloved escape from the city for figures like Eleonora Gonzaga, who was the widow of the Austrian Emperor, Ferdinand II. And she began to expand what was originally a mansion into a great palace on this site that was, for one thing, it was a place that was a sort of a hunting garden and a summer escape for the court. It was also a place that had this artesian well, which is what gives the place its name, because the name Schönbrunn means beautiful spring. But it was there in the 17th century that the current palace was first built to its sort of large extent, and it was designed by a guy named Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, who's not really well known in architecture circles, except that he was the one who wrote the first great history of architecture at the beginning of the 18th century. And it was Fischer von Erlach who also designs the great Karlskirche, or Charles Church, in Vienna, which is another project that we'll see while we're in Vienna. So it's a fascinating opportunity to see this enormous Baroque palace, which is built just after the construction of Versailles outside of Paris, and is a lot kind of indebted to the construction of Versailles. So what happens at the Schönbrunn is that subsequent generations of Austrian emperors are going to expand it as the sort of summer residence of the court outside of Vienna. And as they do, they're going to add to it these great Baroque gardens and sort of wonderful sort of pleasure and fantasy places, a lot like what you would find in Versailles or some of the other great ex-urban palaces in Europe. And then in modern history, it becomes famous too because it's one of those places where, because Austria was right at the verge between East and West, for example, it was a place where there was a famous meeting between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev in the midst of the Cold War and during the Allied occupation of Austria. So it's a really fascinating place, the Schönbrunn.
Great. The next day, we're actually going to arrive in Budapest. So we'll be touring the Parliamentary Building in Heroes Square. What can our travelers expect to see at the Hungarian capital today?
Well, Budapest is another one of my favorite cities on the planet. It's a really spectacular city, really beautiful. It has these moments of wonderful intimacy and other moments of great grandeur and monumentality. And one of the things that's really fascinating to me as an architectural historian is the way the architecture of the city talks about its history as one of the twin capitals of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Because in the 19th century, as Budapest emerges as another great city on par with Vienna in terms of industry and population, the Hungarians demand equal representation within the empire. And so Budapest becomes the kind of the second capital to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, along with Vienna. And so they build a great royal palace across the Danube, and the parliament emerges out of that. It's an opportunity to represent it's a form of popular representation and democracy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the building is a kind of a fascinating combination of neoclassical monumentality and Gothic detailing. So it's a kind of an odd mixture, but at the same time, it's a really lovely building, and it's kind of wonderful to walk around the squares that surround it. It also has a spectacular location right on the river, so it'll act as kind of a wonderful gateway to the city as we arrive by boat. And the other things that I should mention about Budapest is that it's a city that really does engage the river in wonderful ways. So the two halves of the river, which were originally called Buda and Pest, each have their own character. One is more level and sort of open with broad avenues. The other is hillier with tinier streets. And it's really quite wonderful to explore both sides of the river.
And sadly, that brings us to day 10 of the itinerary, where we disembark and depart Central Europe for home. David, thank you so much for providing this preview into what we can expect to see on the trip. Very, very educational to speak with you today.
Thank you.
And for any additional questions after today's conversation with David Rifkind and on this trip itinerary, please contact Architectural Adventures at 1-800-293-5725. You can also contact us at travel@architecturaladventures.org or visit us on our website, www.architecturaladventures.org. Here's also a snapshot of the 2017 trip schedule. You can learn more on our website.